know, because I'll, Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Amy Hanreddy, and I'm a professor of special education at Cal State Northridge. This presentation is really the culmination of work that's been done in a collaborative since March, since we first began distance learning, and we're excited to share with you a lot of the things that we've done. So our focus here is on utilizing family support plans to tailor distance learning programs to meet the needs of students with significant support needs.
Hi, I'm Rachel Woodward. I'm the Director of Special Services for WISH Charter Schools, and I, along with a large group of folks, have been participating in this service delivery work group every Monday since schools shut down back in March. We met with the intent to collaborate, problem solve, trial and error, figure out what was going to work best to serve students with the most extensive support needs in this distance learning setting. And we have been consistently meeting with groups of folks from Cal State Northridge, CHIME Institute, their preschool, elementary, and middle school program, WISH Charter Schools, TLC, Tomorrow's Leadership Collaborative in the City of Orange, LA Unified School District, and Culver City Unified School District. And we really just had a problem-solving focus, trying to come together to talk about what's worked, what didn't, what we needed to rethink in a setting where, you know, we didn't have any judgment over one another and the work that we were doing, and just with the goal of positive outcomes for kids with significant support needs in this distance learning setting.
So just to kind of take a moment and look at the broader perspective, we really see ourselves as part of the national landscape in identifying practices focused on meeting the needs of students with disabilities during distance learning. There are some excellent resources from Council for Exceptional Children, the TIES Center, Educating All Learners, and several others. I'll share about a Padlet that we've put together in a little bit, and all of these links and resources are available there. Many of the resources that have been put out are not necessarily focused on the needs of students with the most extensive support needs, and that was an area that, as Rachel said, we really wanted to kind of target in on in our work. And although we're focused on that group, we've also found that many of the practices that we're going to talk about today are relevant to a very broad range of learners, including sometimes students without disabilities. On the left, oh, go back for a second. On the left, there's this little table that says online instruction, low and no tech, and alternative options. One of the things that we've talked about when we talk about what distance learning is that we want to be careful about conceptualizing distance learning as not only talking about online instruction. I think sometimes when we hear the word distance learning, families and educators sometimes make that synonymous with online learning. And in the work that we've done, and particularly in our work related to family support plans, we've really worked on broadening that to include, yes, online instruction, both synchronous and asynchronous, but also interactive activities, things that kids do at home with their families. And really sometimes part of that is working directly with families and caregivers to do coaching, training, and problem solving strategies for in-home support. So one of the first things that we did was to put together a survey to learn more about the perspectives of families who were supporting their students with more significant needs at home. So I'm going to share a couple of these results, and just wanted to kind of keep in mind that the survey was done earlier in the stage of distance learning. So these were done last spring, And I'm actually working now with Samantha Taves at CSUN, and we're putting together a new survey, and we'll also be sharing the results of that new survey in a different session. So one of the first questions that we asked was, we wanted to hear from families what their hopes were for a distance learning program for their child. So as they kind of thought about the months ahead, what did they hope that their child would gain from the program? So you can see that over 75% of families really wanted that program to focus on communication and literacy skills. They want their children to remain connected with their peers, and they want their kids to develop academic skills in all areas and be connected with their teachers. You can also see one thing that stands out here is the variety in their responses. So, you know, although there were a lot of people on the top there wanting to focus on communication and literacy skills, it's also notable that some of those things that are there on the bottom, we don't want to lose sight of those families who are really worried about some other types of skills, participating in household tasks, developing fine motor skills, and developing skills in entertaining themselves independently. So not surprising at all is the response to this question when we asked what their greatest challenges were during this time. Again, over 77% said that their greatest challenge was providing support to their child while managing other responsibilities. Then encouraging their child to complete school-provided activities, and then you can see the other things that are listed there near the top include personal fatigue, anxiety, or stress, that some of the materials were not accessible or motivating, and that many families are supporting more than one child or person in their household. And when asked what was important to them in distance learning, we then provided families with a list of a wide range of distance learning related activities or options, and asked families to kind of tell which of those were most important to them. So up on the top is scheduling live times to interact with their child, videos and updates to connect with the child from educators, and that their child be included in general education distance learning opportunities. So then on the next slide, we've provided families with the same list and asked them which things have actually been a part of the distance learning program for their child so far. And you can see that those things that were listed as most important to them are not there at the top of the list. That most common was those online activities. Next was packets. Now remember, this was earlier in distance learning when packets were kind of, many schools were using that as a short-term solution. And that educators were holding live class meetings with the child's class. So just the difference between those two questions, I think, was one reason why it became very evident that we needed to work more closely with families to understand their perspectives and better meet their needs during distance learning. And then let's look at the last slide. So then finally, and this was actually a suggestion from a parent to include this question when we asked, to what degree does their child appear to enjoy their distance learning program? So if we combine not at all and slightly, then we have about 70% of families so that their child is not really enjoying their distance learning program. And only 2% said that their child was enjoying that program very much. And although we didn't ask that question, I think that that would be a pretty significant difference from their experience with going to school in person. So another thing that our group has been looking at is kind of trying to make some clear connections between what we know are evidence-based practices for students with more significant needs and the application of those practices in a distance learning scenario. So, so what you see on the screen now is kind of a list of things that we know are generally evidence-based practices, just tweaked a little bit to apply to distance learning. So we know that emphasis on access to meaningful instruction in context is an important practice. Now, when we're looking at distance learning, we're using the home and the community as the context where students are accessing instruction. We still retain our emphasis on access to general education curriculum and activities. Now more than ever, high levels of collaboration, coordination, and transdisciplinary teaming, as well as integrated services, are core elements of programs. And I think that you'll see some evidence of those in the examples that we're going to share. Given the critical aspect of communication and literacy for students with the most significant needs, we know these need to be a core aspect of their program. We are still responsible for ongoing progress monitoring and using formative assessment to gather information about student performance. And now we need to work more closely with families in order to capture that information and that data. Social supports and relationship building we know is a priority for families, and so that remains an important quality of these programs. Self-determination, the ability for students to develop strategies for retaining some control and choice in meaningful decisions about their own lives. And then really focusing on topics that are age appropriate while considering how those topics might need to be adjusted in format or complexity to meet students' unique needs. And then finally, in order to do all of those things, we have found that close collaboration with families is the only way to really develop a really well-tailored program, starting with kind of those long-term goals for what we want students to gain through their distance learning programs. So I mentioned a Padlet, and this is really just kind of like an online bulletin board with lots of resources. We've been compiling these resources since March, and we keep adding to them. What you see on the screen is there's a QR scan code. So if you just hold your phone's camera right up to the screen, then you can access that link, but it's also written there on the screen so that you can type it in if you need to. And the resources that we'll be talking about today, we'll make sure that those are included in the Padlet, and they'll be mostly on the far left side of the Padlet are all of the guidelines and really specific resources. And then the rest of the materials are kind of collections of those resources from other organizations, example activities taken from teachers, and really just kind of some of the tools to kind of make those things more practical as we're designing instruction.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Healey from CHIME Institute's Charter School, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the implementation framework for how we were making sure students who had more significant needs were accessing their instruction. So we wanted to make sure that instruction for all students was a mix of asynchronous or pre-recorded teaching sessions by an expert teacher, making sure that student had access to the general ed curriculum, that they had independent assignments that were appropriate and meaningful, and then access to co-taught synchronous teaching where they benefited from both the special education teacher and the general education teacher's expertise during live Zoom lessons. We structured social opportunities and clubs to continue peer relationships and provide social emotional support for students. So at CHIME, this looked like maybe it was led by the gen ed and sped teacher. A lot of our service providers were very involved. Speech pathologists, occupational therapists found this was a meaningful time to provide push-in services in our collaborative model. And then we also just created social situations for the sake of being social, from a Pokemon club to a club literally called Doodle and Eat, where everyone just logged on and they doodled and they ate, kind of trying to replicate some of the more natural, organic moments on campus where kids are really motivated to communicate and practice a lot of the skills that they're being taught and generalizing those skills across settings. Finally, students with IEPs participated in Zoom sessions with service providers, so they did get that direct service as well. And embedded in-home activities were determined with the support of a goal matrix, which I'm going to walk you through in our next slide. So in the goal matrix, this was really a tool because part of what distance learning has shown us is like the parents are really seeing how do IEP goals get targeted. They're a co-owner of this work now, willingly or unwillingly, we're all doing it together. So the matrix was a way to articulate it in parent-friendly language, so a variety of paraprofessionals, service providers, teachers, parents all could access what that student really needed to be working on so we could maintain implementing the IEP with as much fidelity as possible. So on the top, you see goal 1, objective 1, so forth, IEP goal 2, and then just really describing the approach across different settings in a home-based activity, letting the parent know that the things they're doing at home at the dinner table could be opportunities to have repeated practice at counting. You know, maybe the child has an opportunity to set the table. We need 6 forks, something like this. Academic activities, describing the approach of how we might do it in a live Zoom versus how we might do it with an asynchronous Zoom. And then those social activities. If we're going to log in and show up for Doodle and Eat, how are we going to work on IEP goal 1 in that context? And really making it plain spoken and accessible to a variety of people who might not have specific training in this domain. All right, and this became the bread and butter of our distance learning program, particularly for students with significant needs, was what we call the distance learning support plan template. So it really was a way to engage the family in a not formal IEP to just be like, how's it going at your house? What does your life look like at your house? And how can we mesh together the school needs and the school criteria with the reality of distance learning in the home? So we wanted to know which family members are around helping out with distance learning, if any. Who are the teachers on the caseload? When are we meeting so we can sort of benchmark progress from March 13th, the fateful date that we began our school closure, forward? Thinking about what the hopes are, like from the survey data that Hanreddy reviewed earlier in the slides, like what are the hopes and aspirations for the family? What are their greatest concerns? Kind of articulating some of their fears, anxiety, nightmares to just get it out there so that we can try to mitigate some of that worry. And what types of support would be the most useful to the parent and the child during this time? So again, we were able as school providers to give examples of what support could be that's feasible, like a good old-fashioned phone call. Is it an online meeting or is that stress-inducing? Is it hands-on activities to do in the home? Can we get you stuff? We have stuff. We could, you know, coordinate a no-touch pickup. Interactive online meetings with friends. Maybe friends were the thing that really made that student light up and want to use their AAC device. How can we try to contrive a situation where they get to practice that? Training for parents on specific strategies. If there was a prompt hierarchy that we knew that was really successful, is there any way we can transmit some of that knowledge to the families? And then just video examples, right? Maybe the parent just wants to log on and watch Miss Buchinsky in action and try to be Miss Buchinsky whenever they can. So really the family support plan is designed to cater to the sort of parent-family perspective with the student at the center. Moving on, what does like a typical day in your house look like, right? We knew that families, some people are sleeping in super late, some people aren't sleeping at all. You know, what do meals look like? It's all happening in the home. So we want to be honest and open about that and try to work with it. So providing some sample daily schedules for those realities, from more structured to less structured based on what that parent's capacity is in the moment. And asking for feedback about a schedule that works for the family, right? We want to maintain the integrity of a full inclusive atmosphere that's collaborative, and also just acknowledge, you know, if someone's having complicated health issues related to the pandemic or not, how can we embed that in the day and still make the day meaningful and kind of up to snuff in terms of the IEP. So the family support plan also went through sort of other supports and services that they're receiving. We know that there was like a dark period during early quarantine where no one's coming into homes, but over time we noticed maybe some respite was coming, maybe there was a night nurse. Is there a way we can leverage that? Is there a super flexible night nurse who's like, you know what, yes, I will go through the times tables with him during our bath routine? You never know. So we just wanted to maximize all of the people at our disposal. Creating that daily, weekly distance learning schedule, particularly for that student, you know, in sync with what their gen ed peers are doing, but also the reality of the family landscape at the time. getting the best way to contact people. We learned during distance learning communication is key, and catering to people's strengths was going to make it more sustainable for everyone. So establishing norms around that, and then making a follow-up plan for like, when are we going to check in with each other? Do we check in once a week? Do we check in once a month? Do we check in every day? We had a family that was checking in every day, and we found a way to make it sustainable for the professionals and for the family. So really this template created a standardized experience for many parents of students with significant needs on our campus that was uniform. So, you know, parents talk, they want to make sure they're all getting the good stuff that's available, but also it's personalized. So it's not like a one size fits all at all. So that is a family support plan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Adie Buchinsky. I am a special education teacher at CHIME Charter School, and also the special education teacher on special assignment. And I am going to walk you through some distance learning family support plans that we created for a number of students on campus. We've selected some exemplars that cover students with a wide variety of needs and also a wide variety of ages. Our campus serves TK through 8th grade, so you'll see some examples across those. So my first example here is for a student in TK, transitional kindergarten. This was a student whose disability primarily impacted sensory regulation and social emotional learning, not so much academically. The student received special education and occupational therapy services. And the plan that we devised with this family, the student was having a really hard time acknowledging that parents are my teachers. So we had a Monday morning check-in where teachers kind of passed the learning baton on to families, and the student watched us say, here are your assignments for the week, and dad is going to do them with you. And that was really important for that family. They were struggling with the student agreeing to do work with the parents, and that was something that made their lives much easier. We offered the student a lot of different ways to complete assignments. You can do them in chalk outside, so you're getting some gross motor movement. You can run around the house while you're yelling your answers out and getting them recorded, whatever's working for your sensory regulation at the moment. We also had the student participate in small group sessions throughout the week that were co-taught by his special education and general education teachers. The student had some difficulty attending, getting his sensory system ready at the right time to log on. So that was a barrier. We also had one small group session per week for the student to work on social skills related to those IEP goals. And then we had individual sessions every month with the occupational therapist to provide some training and feedback for the families. They were used to helping the student with his sensory regulation at the grocery store and at home, but there was a lot more leeway that they had versus you need to sit down and accomplish an academic task. So we created a space in which they could ask questions and get feedback and brainstorm ways that home could replicate some of the same sensory routines that we're working at school. So those sessions, the student was not participating in. It was collaboration between parents and staff. So like I said, this was a student with more mild needs, and I know that we're focusing on students with more significant needs in this presentation, but we wanted to show you that this distance learning support plan really is a tool that can work for all families. Another example that I want to walk through with you is a 3rd grade student with, you can see a very long list of services that he has provided. He is working on the Common Core state standards, but with a high level of accommodation for his vision impairment. He also has both fine motor and gross motor challenges that we needed to work on. So we created 2 individual sessions per week where he was logging on with the special education teacher to review math concepts and utilize his Wilson reading program. And the LAS, OT, and the teacher of the visually impaired were hopping in on those sessions to make sure that he had access to the curriculum and the teaching style. And those sessions were used to help him improve his access to the lessons provided by the general education teacher. So during math concept time, sometimes that was previewing or reviewing concepts that were taught in the whole group lesson. He also met weekly with our orientation and mobility specialists to engage in mobility exercises around the student's neighborhood. We really leveraged Mom as our videographer, walking around the neighborhood with her son, getting different angles so that the O&M specialist could provide feedback on how the student was mobilizing with his wheelchair and gait trainer. We also had individual sessions. It was a really cool collaborative group that our SLP and our teacher of the visually impaired put together, where they were reviewing vocabulary from our novel study, providing visuals, and working on the salient features in those visuals to help the student gain access to the comprehension tasks that were happening in the language arts curriculum. And then we had a powwow at the beginning, and we said, what are we going to do with PT and adapted physical education? How are we going to incorporate that in a Zoom world? So the solution we came to with this family, Mom is highly educated in these areas as well. And so the PT and APE worked together to curate some activities that would work for the student in the area of their goals, and also leveraged the things that Mom had at home already, and games that the student could play with a sibling or with a parent. And then there was ongoing check-in as needed. And then we had small group sessions every week to co-teach the content area. Student was not attending at that time. That was something that we, moving from the spring into the fall, the family has recommitted and the plan has been revised, and he is now attending those. As Caitlin said, when we were going over the distance learning support plan, the family was honest and said, we have limitations right now. We have multiple students we're trying to get on Zoom. Parents are trying to work. We don't have support in the home that we used to, and this is what we can do, and this is what we cannot do. And we went with it. We tried not to make the family feel bad about the things they weren't able to do, and just try and make the most impact on the things that they were able to attend. And then I'll talk you through one more example from our school. We had a 7th grade student who receives modifications to his curriculum. He has special education, language and speech services, occupational services, and APE services. And this family was also struggling with how are we going to get the content done. The student's primary caregiver is his mother, who did not feel that her English skills were proficient to support him in his academics. So we thought creatively. His older sister works as an ABA therapist and was not working at the time. And so she jumped on board, and she was providing a lot of that academic support, where Mom didn't feel that she was prepared to do that. We had, for this student, 2 individual sessions per week with the special educator, paraprofessionals, preferred peers, getting everybody the student likes in the Zoom room to make them as excited about the learning as possible. And they reviewed some materials that were related to the student's IEP goals, getting some discrete goal practice in. Then there was a family check-in every week. Mom wanted to know what was going on and was definitely the cruise ship director at home, making sure that everything was happening at the time. And she would ask all the questions that she had for the occupational therapist, the LAS provider, the educators, and then she would figure out, okay, these are the activities I felt confident doing with him. These are the ones I'm going to have his older sister do with him. And then the student was on board for doing some yoga with peers. That was how we set up a fun Zoom session to work on communication practice. The special educator and paraprofessionals were on board, and yoga was just the activity that worked for this child to get them communicating using their AAC and limited verbal output. The service providers did a lot of checking in with the family, a lot of emailing. Family wasn't necessarily asking a lot of questions up front, so they just kept with the outreach, kept sending emails and checking in during those collaborative meetings. And as is the foundation of all of our inclusive programs, there was co-taught lessons available to the student throughout the week. This family also did not feel that they could always get on at the appropriate time, and that was their limitation. And so we worked with it and created different opportunities for the student to engage with their goals, to engage with their peers, and to make sure that the family felt they had the capacity to support the student at home.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Brady. I will be talking about this slide. I am a 6th grade education specialist at WISH Community Charter School, and this is a sample of a 6th grade distance learning support plan that I made for my student in the spring last year. So the profile, this 6th grade student was on a modified curriculum, and he received special education services, language and speech therapy, and occupational therapy. He typically, when on campus, has paraprofessional support throughout the day, and he uses the POD communication system to communicate on an iPad. So when really thinking about how we could make distance learning work for him, it was a lot of collaboration with his mom, who was the primary support during distance learning, and the student very much thrived on being around peers and being able to connect with his teachers in person. And so we really had to brainstorm how to keep him motivated and engaged during distance learning when there was a lot of wait time and technical difficulties. So we came up with 2 individual sessions per week with myself, and the paraprofessionals also joined, some preferred peers. We also had collaborative supports from the occupational therapist and the speech and language pathologist to review materials and make sure we were engaging in communication for the child and really focusing activities to be goal-driven. He joined most synchronous sessions at least 2 times a day, if not more. And in co-taught classes, I would model communication, language, and key concepts using the POD system on my personal device. So when teachers were presenting lesson information, I was supplementing and targeting key concepts using the actual language that he has on his device. So that was one thing that was really helpful for him. He kind of lit up when he heard a word that was on his talker. And then I also had 2 individual family support sessions with them each week. And those would be to provide materials. So it was kind of fluctuating based on the needs of the family each week. So some were really just a one-on-one engagement with the student where we were modeling communication and working on reciprocal interactions. And another session would be talking about how to modify a bigger class assignment that we wanted him to participate in. And then, of course, as we've shared, communication with the families is really important. So there was regular email, texting, and phone calls throughout each day, throughout the week, to make sure that he was engaged, that we could problem solve for issues. So again, when we're thinking of his access, he's on modified curriculum. He was typically in person working on paper modified materials, and mom very early on was like, this is not working, how can we adapt? So I will go into a little bit of what those adaptations looked like. We had to really break it down to, okay, what are the biggest assignments we really want him to participate, and where can we supplement information in a different way like where he can see people's faces, because again, he's very motivated by seeing people and their faces and talking to them. So we had to brainstorm a little bit in order to still supplement for the curricular piece, given that he was not completing the traditional paper mods. And that kind of brings us into the filmed videos. So myself or the paraeducator would film videos for him targeting big concepts or ideas being taught in the following week's classes. We tried to keep them really short. We would lose his attention if it was over a couple minutes. I actually have some examples of what this looks like in the following slide. So we thought that would be great. And again, I used his pod system to identify those key vocabulary terms that would be reviewed. And it was just a little chunk summary to kind of prep him, because he loves watching videos, so he could watch it over and over and over again, and be really prepared for what we were learning the following week. In thinking about social needs, I created a social lunch club with this student and preferred peers based on who he enjoyed interacting with in person and kids that he had access to naturally throughout his typical day schedule. And we had those lunch clubs, like I said, 2 times a week for 30 minutes. And it was really an open social communication time where I tried to let the kids lead, but I would model and facilitate conversations as needed while also using Pod to engage with the student. And then speech sessions were conducted via Zoom weekly, and occupational therapy was provided through the collaboration with myself and consult with the parent. Overall, I think we were able to establish a really great plan for him. It's not the same as in-person learning, but I do feel like this was successful in keeping him engaged and making sure that he got regular access to his peers as well as access to instruction. Thanks. And these are the 2 videos that show how I supported and maintained his interest and engagement with curricular materials. So.
Hi Finn, it's Miss B. I wanted to make you this video to tell you what we're going to be learning about in social studies this week. This week we're going to be learning about Greece. So I want you to pause this video and go look at pictures of Greece. And after you've looked at the video or the pictures of Greece, you can press play again. Go ahead and do that. All right, if you're back, that means you just looked at pictures of Greece. So we're going to be talking about Greece from a really long time ago. And one thing that we're going to talk about this week in regards to Greece is its type of government. And the biggest thing about Greece is that there's 4 different types of government, okay? So I'm going to flip my screen and we're going to look at the picture together. So you have monarchy. See that M for monarchy? You have oligarchy. That's a funny word. You have tyranny, tyranny, and democracy. So see the sentence, it says, over time, the ancient Greeks had 4 different forms of government. So let's say them again. Monarchy, oligarchy, tyranny, and democracy. So to review, Finn, ancient Greece had 4 different types of government. They had democracy, oligarchy, tyranny, and monarchy. Remember, democracy is when all the people share the power. Oligarchy is when some people share the power. Tyranny is when one person takes all the power by force, which means they used probably violence and hurt people for power. And monarchy is when one person gets all the power too. But they usually inherit it. So a king or queen, they maybe inherit their power. So if I had to rate and say which is the one that I like the most and which one I don't like, I'm gonna look at my don't like words. I think that tyranny is the one I don't like the most. I think tyranny is bad and scary. I don't like someone forcing people to give over their power. I don't like the idea of someone taking power by force. I think that's really bad. So tyranny is not my favorite. And I think the one I like the most is democracy. I think democracy is good and great. And personally, it's my favorite. I like when all people have power because we all have our different viewpoints, and I just believe everyone should have power, and that's important to me. But now I want to hear your opinion. Which one do you like the most? Democracy, oligarchy, tyranny, or monarchy? Or you can say if you agree or disagree with my thoughts. All right, Ben, I'll see you this week.
Hi, my name is Jordan Ojeda, and I am a special education teacher at WISH Community School. I have this distance learning support plan here for a third grader I had last year. So this was from the spring. This student was on a modified curriculum, received a lot of different things from special education, language and speech, occupational therapy, and PT. The student, just like some other students mentioned before, typically had paraprofessional support throughout the day, all day, every day of the week. And he used the iPad system as well with Proloquo to go communication system. Just like everyone else mentioned before, communication and collaboration was key when putting together this support plan. We definitely pulled everyone on the team together, especially Mom, who is the primary person working with him at home. We emailed, texted, chatted every day just to see how our things are going. Do we need to adjust anything? Just so we could make sure that he had the best support plan going forward. Mom's biggest want and need for his distance learning was, him working on things that he would still be able to communicate with his classmates on. So if we were doing math, addition and subtraction, like he was working on something similar, just so that he still had that connection with his peers. So to provide those different instructions, I used a platform called Nearpod, and that is all interactive based. He was able to follow along with slides and didn't have to worry about uploading anything to Google Classroom, dragging anything with his mouse. It was all on his iPad where he was able to interact, circle things, pick things. And Mom was really, really happy that we had come across that program because she said it made her life a million times easier by taking away all of those other components that could have made things a lot more difficult to access the work. When he was working on those individualized lessons that aligned with his IEP goals that were manageable for him and for his mom, he was fortunate enough to have multiple different computers up, where one was our class, where he can see his classmates and his teacher just for motivational reasons. Like if something was happening, he didn't want to participate, Mom would be like, hey, like, look, your teacher's still right there. However, on the other screen, it was whatever he was working on in relation to the class. So having him on with us, but working on his own thing, but still able to see us, and we were able to see him. We were able to pull him in every once in a while and have him ask a question, have him share something. And that was really great too, because what he was doing was all aligned with what the class was doing. Just like Miss Brady mentioned before, he had a few sessions during the week that were individual with us. Me and him just one-on-one. Sometimes a para would come in, sometimes our OT or the speech therapist would come in, and we all would collaborate together and work on, those different goals for him. He also had paraprofessional support a few times a day that was all directed through me. So I would provide all the instruction and lessons, and the para would just be another support, more so for mom as well, because she was working so hard with us every day to get him engaged. And I know a lot of parents were like, being mom and teacher is really hard. So we wanted to support in all ways possible. He also participated in social lunch clubs where he was able to choose specific peers that he wanted to interact with and see. And then we also just use our knowledge of other peers in his class that would be good motivators and people who would actually talk and interact with him and just sitting there on a Zoom. So that was really great. And he was always really excited for whenever those times came. So one of our big things we did too for all of his lessons was either myself or the para would record the video. So he was always getting instruction either from myself or instruction that I tailored for the paraprofessional to record. So every lesson he had was a mini lesson, his activities, and through those slides and those interactive Nearpods, I was able to also embed his little star chart to make him motivated, like, yay, 1 activity down, 2 more stars to go, you got this. Lastly, the biggest thing I did that I think was on my end and mom's end, the most important aspect was our weekly individualized schedule, which I'll talk a little bit more on the next page. So on the left-hand side, you can see all of the times, and that was the different class times where our whole class was doing our different assignments and different activities. Like I mentioned, mom really wanted things to be aligned with what the class was doing. So when we said, hey, how do you want to share what you just did? It was something that still aligned and that the other kids could connect to. The main concept of the main idea, what we're working on as a class, and then in the next column, I broke down specifically what he was working on. You can see that where it's blue and underlined, that's where I directly linked his lessons to. So everything was one place. The schedule was in one place, who's supporting him at the time is in one place, and the links are in one place. This was definitely something that took me 2 weeks to figure out, just because I was like sending emails all the time. Things were getting lost, then getting text messages. So this was our final thing that we came across of, this is the best way, to provide that support because everything is in one place. So we had all his assignments linked, how to turn it in, where to turn it in, like everything mom needed could be answered on this page. And then in the afternoon time, we also had a suggested afternoon learning schedule, which he was able to follow, again, working on those different IEP goals with different social breaks and just body breaks embedded in between.
Okay, hi, I'm Jessica Tunney, and I'm the Executive Director of TLC Charter School in the City of Orange. And what I'm going to share with you is a little bit about what we're doing at TLC to systematize some of these practices and systematize how we coordinate the teams that need to work with our students with the most significant needs, systematize how we collaborate, systematize how we individualize, and have a place where the entire team, including parents and families, are really focused on the same set of goals for each child as an individual during distance learning. So what we're looking at here is what we're calling the game plan tool, and it's a adaptation of the classic goal activity matrix that was also shared earlier. I think Caitlin presented a version of the way to adapt the goals activity matrix for distance learning and home learning, and this is another way to do that. So this tool finds its way across many settings at TLC with the teachers, with the service providers, and with families. We also use this tool in our weekly meetings with families between ed specialists and parents. So what you see on that left column is goals that are prioritized and agreed upon between parents and ed specialists. So at this time during distance learning, some goals lend themselves more closely to being worked on at home. So all goals were written for a school context that we're not able to fully enact right now because we don't have the physical classroom setting at our disposal. So our ed specialists work really closely with parents to determine priority goals for a student. And that's what's listed here for this third grade student that I use the sample for. She has a reading goal and a writing goal that the parent and ed specialist have decided to center as something she can work on from home. The next column over, the ed specialist, the parent, the general education teacher, the service providers, and paraprofessionals also can contribute to. And this is where in co-planning weekly, this tool comes at specialists between gen ed teachers and special ed teachers to look for opportunities throughout the week embedded in activities where a student would have opportunities to work towards those goals. We also have parents, when on meetings and calls with ed specialists, identify home opportunities to work towards these very same goals. And it really keeps the whole team focused on what it is that we want to center and prioritize for an individual student. And then if you take a look at the support strategies column moving slightly to the right, then we're starting to specify a little bit more closely. Okay, well, if we're working on this CBC goal in our reading for this student, and the student is looking to pronounce the beginning, middle, and ending sounds, then how are we going to actually support that in her day-to-day participation in class? So one way is to provide her with letter cards so that she can form the CBC words and then prompt her either through a paraprofessional or a parent or a teacher, or when we're at school, a student, and actually we're working towards having students prompt each other online, but we haven't gotten there quite yet. That support strategies column is where the team can really specify the methods through which we're going to support children in working towards our goals. And then on the right side, we use this also as a data collection tool. So systematizing the process of data collection is really important during distance learning this time, because we're not only progress monitoring, but we really need to adapt our program and our supports and our strategies with students during this time for distance learning in an ongoing and very focused manner, especially since we're in these uncharted waters of educating students from home. And then on the next slide, I'll show you a little bit about how that tool functions across the weeks and hopefully in the upcoming months at TLC. So one place I mentioned on the last slide is that game tool makes its way into co-planning sessions. So at TLC, co-teachers co-plan weekly to make sure that everything in the general education classroom is accessible and able to be offered to all students that are in the class, including those with the most significant support needs. And so that co-planning meeting includes looking at those game tools for each individual child that are in those classes, and have those tools to make sure that right off the bat, the curriculum embeds the supports and goals-oriented strategies that the student's going to need. Paraprofessionals also have an opportunity to contribute to it at that time, service providers and teachers. The tool then is also used daily by paraprofessionals, mostly, also by teachers, and we're moving towards identifying places where parents may want to contribute data related to working towards one of the goals that was prioritized and one of the goals that they're then directly supporting their child in working towards at home. And then during our weekly family check-in meetings between our special education teachers, our ed specialists, and parents, we have a kind of check-in agenda routine that the ed specialists are using when they meet with parents to really guide those conversations of check-in and make sure they stay focused on the students' needs, on the goals that we've centered and identified, and then also make space to listen to challenges and issues that come up for parents and adapt our program and also adapt what we have on the game plan tool to make sure it's meeting the needs that are emerging over time as the weeks and months move on. New needs tend to emerge. So the check-in meeting includes just a start of successes and challenges of the week. What strategies were really helpful for the child? What was the child excited about? What was really there are features of home, balancing work and support for your child that can really impede plans that we've made. And so we want to listen to those, air those out, and see what we can do with them. So we start with that. And then the ed specialists and the parents talk about questions or issues of concern. You know, I'm not sure this is going to work overall. I'm not sure how best to support my child if they're refusing to participate in an activity that was offered to the whole class, things like this. And we take about 5 to 10 minutes for that as the ed specialist documents. And then we go back with the game tool. So then the ed specialist has that game tool and has data that has been taken on how progress was being made with the student over the course of the week and talk to the parents about it. So that's an opportunity then for parents and ed specialists to really get together and collaborate and think about making sure that the goals identified are the best ones for these purposes and look for alternatives as needed. So these examples are really about how to take what a lot of the other members of this group have shared about these highly individualized conversations that need to go on between our teaching teams and families at home in this distance learning context. And what we're sharing here from TLC is really how we operationalize that school-wide so that everybody, parents included, is really able to collaborate and be coordinated with the shared goal of supporting distance learning for our learners that require a high level of support.
Okay, so we hope that some of these examples were helpful. You can see that a lot of these tools are kind of different versions with all similar focus on embedding goals and individualized student supports into home activities and designing those programs around what each family felt was most essential or accessible to them and their children. So our emails are all there. You're welcome to contact us. And also, I just wanted to send a reminder also about the Padlet. So the activities and tools that were referenced here, we'll make sure that those are up on the Padlet so that you'll have one easy central place. So you can always go back, find that link again if you didn't think you wanted it before, but now you want it. Feel free to go back and visit the Padlet. And thank you and good luck.